Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. If you want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there. So as we kind of move into the NBA season, I told him, I said, Lawrence, I know you don't listen, you're a busy guy, but holy shit, did I miss on this? I was like, this Harden thing, give me a break. Where's Westbrook going to play? The chemistry. And he was really interesting. He said, at this point in James' career, shit, he wants to be coached and win. He got money. He got fame. He just wants to win games. I have watched probably 6 of their last 7 games. And I don't know if I told you this. It is the most enjoyable NBA offense, in my opinion, to watch. Mid-range, transition, threes, multiple wing scorers and defenders. I honestly think Boston and Denver and the Clippers, to me, feel different than the rest of the league. Now, the Clippers have some scoring on the bench. Celtics, Denver don't really. But I've never said this in my life. A, I was totally wrong. And B, I do feel like the Clippers could win a championship.
I'm with you on thinking it could happen, but you're also telling me Kawhi and Paul George are going to be healthy at the end of the year, which has not been a good health bet. They're the worst health bet of any of the contenders. But I did a pod probably a week ago after watching them go on this ridiculous stretch where you're like, okay, this is significant. We're talking about a 27-6 stretch. Although by the time we're taping this, it was pretty alarming seeing Minnesota handle them so well in the second time they played them. Which, there's some matchup stuff with that had me thinking about, wow, they really bogged them down. But yeah, look, Kawhi has played at a level that's almost like peak Kawhi again, and he's been playing most of the season. Paul George, who we knew put up massive numbers, was one of the 10 most talented players. I thought he had a lot of playoff warts that were legitimate. I mean, he had an elimination game with Oklahoma City. It was terrible when they blew the 3-1 lead to Denver at the end of that. I mean, it was just bad. So it was kind of like, hey, is he one of these guys? And I thought once everybody else was gone and they took out Utah a few years ago and it was all on him and he had no choice, he had no one else to even defer to, that I think I hope for his sake that he's turned the page on that a little bit. But I was with you on Harden. I just didn't think he's somebody you'd want to get into business with. It had been the 3rd team he had quit on, the 4th trade demand, which I don't really blame him for the first one because he wanted to make his money and Oklahoma City wanted to pay Durant, Westbrook, and Ibaka. So that one didn't bother me. The end of Houston bothered me. The end of Brooklyn bothered me. And the Philly one, I mean, I thought he was very peak and valley again in the playoffs when they needed him most, and they blow the 3-2 lead to Boston. And I've shocked people with this because they know I don't really like him and I don't like the way he's officiated and all that stuff. Yeah, none of it's really personal. I don't know the guy. Maybe he's a guy. It sounds like people love hanging out with him. So he thought he was getting the big money, but he took 13 million less. And Philly's adamant that nothing was ever understood. And I'm always like, I don't know a lot of guys that just leave 13 million on the table without thinking the extension is coming to make up for it. He doesn't play well enough against the Celtics. That extension now is whatever was talked about, depending on who you want to believe. But when he had been traded finally, Colin, even though Lawrence Frank is telling you, hey, he wants to win and he wants to be coached, his first answer was, I want to go somewhere I can get paid. It just so happens to be a contender from an area that's close to where he's from and with an owner that has the deepest pockets of anybody. And I think the lesson in all of this is that Harden would have been super unappealing for a lot of other scenarios where it's still a no for those teams. But credit to the Clippers, the culture, having the other guys established, he doesn't have to be the guy. He's probably going to get paid. And now that he's the 3rd guy, he can have those playoff duds, which are all over, littered throughout his game log in his playoff history, where he could maybe even still have one of those and it won't matter because the way the rest of the team is built.
So you mentioned Boston, and we know your connection to that city. Yeah, I was getting into this, I think a couple of weeks ago on my show. I said, you can really tell very early in a relationship with a friend or an athlete, people show their strengths, weaknesses, their fears, their aspirations really early. And you see it with pro athletes. There's very few guys that develop into 4 years later a star. You can see early the aspiration, the toughness, Michael's relentlessness, Kobe's kind of selfishness. You read the Kobe stories when he broke into the league, he was shit talking guys. He was 19. And I said this about Jayson Tatum. He's shown us who he is. Absolutely gifted, top 8, 9 player in the league. You can put him wherever you want. But there is an argument that he's not like aggressively, relentlessly alpha. I mean, he's a dude. He wants the ball. But I've seen so many times where Jaylen Brown, who's athletic as hell, but not as gifted, not as pure, will just take the ball. I saw Marcus Smart do it. And I keep saying to myself, I like Jayson Tatum, but because he trained with Kobe, or because generally the best domestic player in our country has that like almost selfishness. And I'm like, he doesn't really. He's told us who he is. He can be a 1, but he doesn't feel like the killer. Is that too broad? Or do you feel like, I mean, I feel like, come on, we're in what, year 6, year 7? I kind of know what he is. He's an A, he's a 1, but there's just certain things. I don't feel he has that grab the game by the throat thing that like Luka showed me in year 1. Kobe showed me at 19. I don't feel that with him.
Yeah, like I saw somebody breaking down Caleb Williams the other day and said he's not Patrick Mahomes. And I was like, okay. Like, should we add an extra episode of the podcast this week? Like, what do you want me to do with this information? All right. If you're telling me, like, I look at that group of players that completely change who you are as a franchise and elevate you to the point where they're in their prime, that you're contending for a championship. You know, I love the draft. We start talking about some of these guys. I'm like, look, we're lucky to get one of these guys every 5 years, you know, but when it comes draft time, you're talking about, hey, maybe this is the face of the franchise. Maybe this guy. Actually, that list is like this. You know, we talk top 5 all the time. I think it's Jokic. I think it's Giannis. I think it's Luka. I think it's Embiid. And then I think everybody's kind of fighting for 5 again, whether it was Kawhi for a stretch, whether it's Durant. And I think Tatum gets put into that group. And Tatum reminds me a lot of like your home quarterback, where people that don't watch the quarterback you watch every week might like him more because you see some more of the warts. So your criticisms are fair, but what you're asking him to be is like in that top 4 group, and that might not happen. And when it comes to the toughness part of it, I think the Celtics get talked about like incredibly unfairly. They get talked about like they're the Sixers with their playoff failures. The Sixers can't get out of the second round. All right. and the number of teams that would love the failures of the Boston Celtics with this group in the playoff, I think that's a pretty long list. And even though there are moments where I watch Tatum, and you're right, we're visual, so his personality seems more subdued, okay?
Yes.
You know, everybody wants every guy to be Kobe and fucking pulling their jersey and sticking their lower jaw out and honestly taking a lot of really bad shots. But it didn't matter. Like, Kobe was the killer because he sold us on the image of him being a killer. And Tatum doesn't do that. But Tatum dropped 51 in an elimination game against the Sixers, set a Game 7 record last year after Steph had set it previously at 50 against Sacramento. He had 46 in an elimination game against the Bucks. You know, they won a Game 7 at Miami. Look, I'm sorry they lost the finals. I still can't believe they lost the Miami Heat last year at 3-0.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of stuff there on the resume that tells you the thing you might be asking for, you might be right. It might be unobtainable for him, but man, he's really close to that. So I guess this isn't, I think you know me, like whenever I hear about their failures or their lack of toughness, I go, man, if they weren't if there was zero toughness, maybe losing some of these other series. You know, they lose to the Bucks a few years ago. Go ahead.
Like the first 2 years I watched Andrew Wiggins, I went to, for some, no, I mean, I went to 3 T-Wolf games in LA, and I'm like, he had 26, don't remember a bucket. Not a bucket.
Right.
And I remember telling a radio guy from Minnesota I know, I'm like, dude, that's not it. That's not a 1. That may be a 3. I always feel Tatum's a 1. He never disappears. Like Wiggins, he was more visible with the Warriors.
Tatum's a 1, but he's not on that list that you're hoping he gets to. And we agree on that.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think that's a good way to put it.